For the past 2.5 millennia, the men of the Empire have stood against unimaginable terrors with nothing but steel, faith, and gunpowder. The Waz of Gorbat Ironclaw in the early 1700s and Grom the Paunch in the early 2400s inflicted grievous wounds upon the Southern Empire, while the Skaven nearly destroyed Sigmar's realm with the Black Plague in the 1100s. The vampire accounts came close to capturing Altdorf twice during the 2000s and early 2000s, seeking to drown the greatest nation of men in the Old World under a tide of rotten corpses. Then there is the persistent threat of chaos. Gorthor the Beast Lord devastated Hochland and Ostland in the mid-1500s, while Norskins constantly raid and harry the coastlines. These are times of horror in the Empire, and they can break the men that face them. Yet they are also times of great heroism, and the men that rise above them can become legends among their peers. Such is the case of the Swords of Ulric, one of Middenheim's most notorious bands of swordsmen. The Swords of Ulric hail from the dark days of the 12th century, when Middenheim was one of the last imperial bastions still standing against the Skaven. They almost certainly saw action at the Battle of the Howling Hills, when Count Mandred Skavenslayer led his forces to drive the Ratmen from the Empire. In the days since, their attention has turned to the Beastmen of the Drakewald. The swords regularly patrol the forest, seeking to thin out the Brayherds before they can menace the people of Middenland once more. This has become a key part of the unit's identity, to the point where they no longer engage in formal training, instead preferring to practice on the children of chaos. Anyone seeking to join the Swords of Ulric must accompany them on these patrols. Novices who fight with honor and survive are welcome to the unit. Those who don't are quickly forgotten. In keeping with their name, the Swords of Ulric are one of several swordsman companies paid for by the Temple of Ulric in Middenheim. Despite this prestigious patronage, the Swords of Ulric are not formal by any means, turning their nose up at ceremony and identical uniforms. Instead, every sword is expected to equip themselves as they see fit, so long as they don the blue and white of Middenheim. The company's only unifying mark is their yellow shields, each of which is marked with the blood-red image of a great wolf. Its lupine countenance is often the last thing their enemies ever see, as the Swords of Ulric are renowned for their ferocity in battle. The Swords of Ulric met their end relatively early during the End Times. After Balthazar Gelt erected the Ulric Bastion in the summer of 2524 IC, its defense fell primarily to the elector counts of Ostland, Ostermark, and Hochland, but warriors from every province rallied to their side. The swords were among them, taking their place under the grand command of Aldebrand Ludenhof, elector count of Hochland. His forces protected the bastion's central stretch. Ludenhof's almost supernatural talent for battle logistics ensured that most breaches were met with overwhelming force, but even he couldn't perfectly predict where the forces of chaos would break through the wall every time. Worse still, a great plague descended from the north, ravaging Ludenhof's forces with disease. The Count of Hochland's plans were thrown into disarray with the influx of the dead and dying, delaying reinforcements to critical weak spots along the bastion. Such was the case of the town of Kraghof. When the Ulric Bastion had collapsed near the settlement, only the Swords of Ulric were close enough to respond. Unfortunately, they were among the first to fall ill when the plague arrived, and their sword arms were weakened by sickness. Undaunted, the Swords of Ulric fought with all the ferocity of their patron god, holding the breach for the better part of the day without any assistance, despite their illness. When help finally did arrive, they found the bastion intact and the ground littered with dead northerners. Alas, the effort had been too much for the Swords of Ulric, and their corpses were clustered around their tattered battle standard. The valiant warriors had drawn together one last time before the end, meeting death alongside their battle brothers. In Total War Warhammer, the Swords of Ulric are the elector count unit from Middenland. As an elector count unit, you can't access them in multiplayer, so this breakdown will focus more on their role in single-player campaign than usual. There are several ways to recruit these swordsmen, depending on which Empire faction you're playing as. For Karl Franz, Balthazar Gelt, and any future lord utilizing the elector count system, the Swords of Ulric are unlocked by owning the city of Middenheim and appointing an elector count of Middenland. Depending on how fast you can conquer or confederate Middenland, you can get access to them relatively early in the campaign. Volkmar the Grim can get them early on as well, as you only need to seal away a single book of Nagash to add them to the recruitment pool. Marcus Wolfhart can theoretically unlock them by continually supporting Middenland in his Hunter Dilemma events, but I went 70 turns in one of his campaigns as research for this video and didn't unlock a single elector count unit in that time, so I can't personally vouch for that. But in theory it works. However you gain access to them, the Swords of Ulric are definitely a useful addition to an early game Empire army. They're a more dangerous version of the basic swordsmen, with 2 more melee attack, 3 more weapon strength, 1 of which is armor piercing, 2 of which is not, and 4 more charge bonus than their standard counterparts. In addition to that, they also cause fear and have the Frenzy special ability. The end result is a swordsman unit with 44 melee attack, 34 weapon strength, and a charge bonus of 20 so long as their leadership remains steady. This increased defensive punch lets the Swords of Ulric deal with threats more efficiently than other swordsmen. To use an easy example, generic swordsmen beat orc boys 5 out of 10 times. Even when they win, the swordsmen are severely weakened, with an average of 30.6 models out of 90 surviving, and 24.4% of their hit points left. In contrast, the Swords of Ulric win that duel 10 out of 10 times. Not only do they take a 50-50 split and turn it into a guaranteed victory, but they also walk away in much better shape, with 50 out of 90 models surviving, and 46% of their initial hit points on average. In terms of both models and hit points, the swords only take 2/3 as many casualties as their generic counterparts. They can't take another fully intact Orc Boy unit afterwards, but they're in much better shape to assist their fellow units than a generic swordsman is. Of course, the Swords of Ulric aren't miracle workers. When confronted by units that demolish swordsmen, such as Orc Biguns, they lose 10 out of 10 times, just like normal swordsmen. In cases like this, however, the difference in performance between generic swordsmen and the Swords of Ulric is even more pronounced, at least by the numbers. While the Biguns win every time against both units, they have 63.8 out of 75 models and 72.7% of their hit points remaining after beating generic swordsmen, on average. After clashing with the swords, however, they only have 53.6 out of 75 models and 58.4% of their initial hit points, again on average. I'd consider both of these to be convincing victories for the Biguns, but they take approximately 1.9 times as much damage from the Swords of Ulric. If you let them take this fight one-on-one, you're still throwing them to the wolves, but they can do significantly better than the normal swordsman unit. At the end of the day, the Swords of Ulric are a weird choice to have as an elector count unit. On one hand, as shown earlier, they do quite well for swordsmen, turning the tide in otherwise split matches, and trading better than normal in guaranteed losses. On the other hand, even if you make an active effort to get them early on, you're still unlocking them in the late early game, right when swordsmen become obsolete. Even if you like to run thematic, infantry-based Empire armies like I do, you've probably already ditched your swordsmen for the defensively superior halberdiers. The swords could potentially expand the lifespan of swordsman units by a few turns, but considering it takes 15 turns to unlock another regiment of them, you probably won't be able to field more than one unit before they become an active detriment to your armies. Their best use, in my opinion, is as a panic defensive unit. If an army or settlement is about to be attacked and there's no time for formal recruitment, you can instantly recruit the Swords of Ulric to pad your forces. It's not the most glamorous role for one of Middenheim's most decorated swordsman regiments, but it does fit nicely with their final, valiant defense of the Ulric Bastion during the end times. In my opinion, the Swords of Ulric are a wasted elector count unit. Those units are semi-difficult to get, slow to mass, and a nice way to theme your armies with functional units. Other elector counts give things that make this headache worthwhile, like unbreakable greatswords, long-range handgunners, and heavily armored spearmen with shields. All of these are good well into the mid-game, and feel like they could potentially bring value to late-game armies too. The swords, in contrast, become obsolete around turn 40, and don't add anything thematically interesting. It's not like Middenland was wanting for potential elector count units either. The Knights of the White Wolf or Knights Panther are both centered around Middenland, so they would have been perfectly reasonable alternatives. If CA is hoping to save those units for a future Knights of the Empire DLC, they could give Middenland the Tüdingen Guard instead. These elite warriors are the bodyguards of the R. Ulric, and could function a lot like greatswords, though obviously with improved stats and special abilities as befits their status as elector count units. Maybe they could have the Frostbite special ability, or the Crush the Weak special ability like Boris Todbringer. Whatever the case, they would still be more useful in an army than the Swords of Ulric. Despite their lofty pedigree, these swordsmen are probably better left unrecognized in-game. With that Total War segment and small editorial section done, we have come to the end of our overview of the Swords of Ulric. I know I was harsh on these guys in-game, but I do genuinely enjoy their lore. Any mere mortal men that can make a name for themselves killing beastmen and demons of Nurgle with swords are alright in my book. I just don't think they're cool enough to be such an important part of the game. Anyways, this was also one of the first videos where I've tried to break down how a Regiment of Renown compares to its generic counterparts. I had to do math and testing and everything. If that's something that interests you guys, please let me know in the comments down below. If you thought it was boring or hard to really care about or didn't really show anything, I'd also like to know that. I'm more than happy to stick with generalist "it's good, it's bad" statements, but I did find some actual testing for this video to be actually useful, and I wanted to share it all with you. That's all I have to say for today though, so until next time, this has been Sigmar's Chosen, signing off for now.